It was a cool spring night in May 1985 when 18-year-old Christine Gallegos headed out into the Salt Lake City dusk, unaware that her life was about to be tragically cut short. Christine told her loved ones she was hitchhiking to work that evening, a common practice at the time, hoping to catch a ride downtown. Young and full of plans for the future, she had recently gotten engaged to her high school sweetheart and was looking forward to starting a family. But Christine would never make it to her job that night. Within hours, the worst had happened. She vanished, and by the early morning of May 16th, her lifeless body was discovered in a weedy field on the west side of town. In the pre-dawn darkness around 4 in the morning, a passerby stumbled upon a horrific scene at 1384 South Jefferson Street. This was just west of an old minor league baseball park known then as Dirks Field, and saw a lot of early morning foot traffic. There lay Christine Gallegos, brutally attacked and left in the shadows of the ballpark neighborhood. The violence inflicted on the teenager was shocking, and she was subjected to a number of forms of assault, before ultimately being shot in the head twice. Evidence at the scene indicated that Christine had fought desperately for her life. Investigators noted clear signs of a struggle, including a trail of blood leading toward the street, suggesting she tried to escape her attacker before collapsing. In the aftermath of the discovery, investigators worked tirelessly to find the man who did this to Christine. They scoured the field and its surroundings for clues, collecting anything that might lead to the perpetrator. Physical evidence was gathered, including biological evidence from an unknown male, and leads were chased down. For Christine's grieving family, the days after May 16th, 1985, were a blur of anguish and unanswered questions. Police interviewed friends, acquaintances, and possible witnesses, and they even considered whether a serial predator might be on the loose. Curiously, there appeared to have been no real attempt to cover up the crime scene, and as mentioned, this area received heavy foot traffic. This led to an early theory that the perpetrator may have been an out-of-towner who acted opportunistically. Despite exhaustive early efforts, no credible suspect emerged. The forensic tools of the mid-1980s were limited, and DNA profiling was in its infancy. Further, no databases of offenders' DNA yet existed. Investigators had some physical evidence, but no way to identify the assailant with it at the time. As weeks turned into months and then years, Christine's case grew cold. The Salt Lake City Police and Utah state authorities periodically revisited the file over the years, submitting samples for new rounds of testing as technology advanced. Still, each promising lead ultimately fizzled, and the trail remained frustratingly cold. For nearly 40 years, Christine Gallegos lingered in the cold case files, with her case unsolved but never forgotten by either her family or the investigation team. Detectives changed over time, but they passed on the commitment to solve Christine's case to each new generation of investigators. Meanwhile, Christine's family endured an agonizing wait for answers. Her mother, Leah Gallegos, woke up every day to the painful reality that her daughter's attacker was unknown and unpunished. Leah later shared that not a day went by that she didn't think of Christine, and she often found herself in tears over the lost opportunities for the life the two of them could have shared. As decades passed, it seemed possible that the truth of what happened on that spring night in 1985 might never be uncovered. Yet behind the scenes, investigators refused to give up on the case. By the 2010s, DNA technology had leaped forward. A critical piece of evidence, the unknown male DNA profile from Christine's case, was uploaded into the National CODIS system, which houses DNA from convicted offenders. Unfortunately, no match was found, implying that Christine's attacker had no detectable criminal record that included DNA sampling. The big breakthrough finally came in 2023, nearly 4 decades after Christine's slaying. That year, Salt Lake City Police and the Utah Cold Case Review Board decided to apply cutting-edge forensic technology to the old evidence. Detectives took a fresh look at the case and decided to use a new technology called forensic genetic genealogy to attempt to connect the dots from the DNA. In brief terms, this technique involves sending the DNA to specialized labs that can build a genetic profile and compare it against public databases to find family connections. The hope is to identify relatives of the unknown person and triangulate back to a potential suspect. And yes, of course, before you comment, I know all the regulars out there definitely know what genetic genealogy is, after I've talked it up about 50 different times. But there's still some people out there who are unfamiliar with the tech, so I've got to include at least a brief explanation. The Salt Lake City Police partnered with Othram, a Texas-based forensic DNA lab known for cracking cold cases with this technique. Late in 2023, Othram scientists were given the task of analyzing the DNA from Christine's case with their advanced tools. By early 2024, Othram had developed a detailed DNA profile and zeroed in on a family line. Detectives built out a family tree from the data, painstakingly working their way through possible relatives of the unknown suspect. Before long, they had a name that hadn't appeared in any part of the investigation before: Ricky Lee Stallworth. Stallworth's DNA didn't exist in criminal databases, but the process indicated that he was the likely perpetrator. Investigators were stunned. In reviewing old case files, they confirmed that this man's name had never once come up back in 1985 or in the years afterwards. He was truly a hidden figure, someone who had flown under the radar for 40 years. To be absolutely sure they had the right man, detectives sought out Stallworth's living relatives for a DNA comparison. One of his children agreed to provide a voluntary DNA sample, and it confirmed a match, proving that the crime scene DNA was indeed tied to the Stallworth family. The mystery man was a mystery no more. After decades of uncertainty, police finally had their suspect. Ricky Lee Stallworth was identified as the person responsible for Christine's slaying, but this revelation came with a twist. Stallworth had been a 27-year-old U.S. Air Force airman stationed at Hill Air Force Base, north of Salt Lake City, at the time of the attack. In 1985, he was a young serviceman living in Layton, Utah, not far from where Christine lived, though there's no evidence the two ever knew each other. Investigators believe it was a chance encounter, a predatory man cruising the city, and an innocent young woman looking for a ride. Tragically, by the time police uncovered Stallworth's name in 2023, they were too late to confront him. Ricky Lee Stallworth had died just a few months earlier, in July 2023, of natural causes at the age of 65. The suspect had literally taken his secrets to the grave, and detectives later voiced their frustration that he slipped through their fingers by a matter of months. As they dug into Stallworth's background, a disturbing pattern emerged. It turned out that Stallworth had a dark side largely hidden behind a facade of an ordinary life. In the last years of his life, he had drawn police attention for prowling the city's main thoroughfare, State Street, in the early morning hours. Investigators discovered that he earned an ominous nickname, the State Street Stalker, because he was known to cruise around late at night and approach women with indecent offers. According to one retired detective, Stallworth would tell his wife that he was stepping out for the night, then disappear until dawn. However, aside from a non-violent fraud conviction, much later in 2020, Stallworth had managed to avoid any serious criminal charges during his lifetime. In other words, he left virtually no official trace that would connect him to violent crimes. Piecing together the events of that night, Detectives now believe that on May 15th, 1985, Ricky Lee Stallworth likely noticed Christine as she was hitchhiking and offered her a ride. She probably accepted, seeing no obvious warning signs. Notably, it's been speculated that he may have worn his Air Force uniform to enhance his credibility and put Christine at ease, though this, of course, has never been confirmed. Instead of taking her to work, Stallworth drove the 18-year-old to a secluded area near the ballpark, an area dark and quiet enough at night to hide sinister deeds. There he attacked her, a sudden onslaught of violence. Christine was indecently assaulted and beaten, but she did not go quietly. The evidence of defensive wounds and the blood trail indicates she fought back hard, even managing to scramble out of the vehicle in a bid to escape. In response, Stallworth shot her twice in the head and stabbed her, silencing her resistance in a final brutal act. He then fled into the darkness, leaving Christine to die on the roadside. Hours later, her body was found, and the long hunt for justice began, all while Stallworth continued on with his life as if nothing had happened. He continued to serve in the Air Force, hold jobs after retiring from service, and raise children, all while hiding the evil acts he had committed. Unfortunately, Stallworth may have spent his last moments at peace, knowing that he had gotten away with it, at least in this lifetime. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with my usual reminder for you to hit like and subscribe and also tap that notification bell. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to support my channels more directly. And if you're in the mood for something completely different, check out my channel and video podcast, Lazy Chill History. The links are in the description. For 22 years, Gerald Forsman was little more than a ghost to those who loved him. The Michigan man vanished in the early 2000s with no explanation, leaving his family desperate for answers. It took the chance discovery of a skeleton in a Tennessee forest and some cutting-edge DNA sleuthing to finally unravel what happened. When human remains were found off a quiet road in Knoxville in 2020, nobody imagined they belonged to a long-lost son from Michigan. That was until forensic genealogy linked those bones to a name. Gerald John Forsman grew up in Livonia, Michigan, but by the early 2000s he had drifted out of his family's life. Born in 1958, Forsman was in his mid-40s when he effectively disappeared. At the time, public records indicate he was living in Knoxville, Tennessee, though it's not clear why he moved there or what circumstances led to his sudden absence. What is clear is that after the early 2000s, his relatives in Michigan never saw or heard from him again. Forsman had essentially vanished without a trace, and for over 2 decades his family was left with painful uncertainty about his fate. It's unclear whether a formal missing persons report was ever filed for Gerald Forsman. After all, as an adult, he had the freedom to move without notifying anyone. But either way, no one was able to locate him during those long years, and to his loved ones, he was simply gone. They were left wondering if he might still be alive somewhere, or if something terrible had happened. The mystery of Gerald's whereabouts lingered, unresolved, year after year. On May 20th, 2020, human remains were found in a wooded area near a residential street called Overbrook Drive in Knoxville. The location, a quiet section of South Knoxville not far from the Tennessee River, seemed an unlikely place to find a human skeleton hidden among the trees. At the time, investigators had no idea whose remains they had recovered or that this discovery would ultimately be linked to a Michigan cold case. Police and forensic experts responded to the scene and collected the skeletal remains, along with a number of personal items found nearby. The unknown individual appeared to have been wearing multiple layers of clothing, which were still at the site. Investigators recovered a pair of windbreaker pants, a pair of dark dress pants, and a pair of Wrangler jeans, suggesting the person had dressed in several layers. There was also a navy zip-up hoodie, and even a fragment of a glove with a John Deere logo, hinting at the man's attire and perhaps his work or interests. Most promising to investigators was a wallet found among the clothes, but unfortunately its contents had been ruined by exposure and time. The papers inside were torn, waterlogged, and illegible, yielding no name or ID, only a faded Big Lots store logo on one scrap. In other words, nothing at the scene immediately answered that critical question about this unknown individual's identity. The remains were transported to the Knox County Regional Forensic Center for a closer examination. Forensic pathologists determined that the deceased was an older adult male, likely between 55 and 70 years of age at the time of death. From the skeleton, they estimated his height to be somewhere around 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. Given the advanced state of decomposition, however, there was no way to tell exactly how or when he had died. The cause of death could not be determined from the bones alone, and there were no obvious clues pointing to foul play or natural causes. The mystery remained intact. Investigators knew a few details about the unknown man's physical characteristics, but nothing about his identity or story. Despite these initial findings, putting a name to the remains proved to be a daunting challenge. Police didn't have any of the usual identifiers to work off of, as there were no useful fingerprints or recognizable facial features left. Further, while his teeth were still available for forensic testing, unfortunately, the dental records didn't yield a match. Investigators also compared the case against numerous missing person reports, hoping one of them might describe a man of the same age range and circumstances. But no matches turned up. All conventional methods of identification had failed to reveal who this person was. The case was entered into the NamUs system, and this man became yet another unresolved John Doe case, with little potential for resolution. For a few years, the unidentified bones from Knoxville sat in limbo while authorities had no new leads. By 2023, with the trail still cold, investigators decided to try a new approach that has been revolutionizing cold case investigations. I'll give you a second here to figure out what method they turned to. You guessed it, they turned to forensic genetic genealogy to crack this one wide open. The Knox County Regional Forensic Center submitted a DNA sample from the unknown man's remains to Othram. Othram's scientists painstakingly developed a DNA profile from the skeletal evidence, and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to search genealogical databases. In August 2025, the effort finally paid off. Othram's team reported that they had found potential familial matches pointing to relatives in Michigan. This was the breakthrough investigators had been hoping for. Knox County officials contacted the individuals in Michigan that the genealogical research had flagged. In speaking with these family members, detectives learned that one relative had a long-lost family member named Gerald Forsman, who fit the profile. He was a man from Livonia who would have been in his 60s by now, and whom they hadn't seen in over 2 decades. In fact, one contacted person said they had not seen Gerald in 22 years. To confirm the hunch, one of Gerald Forsman's relatives provided a fresh DNA sample to serve as a direct comparison. The result was definitive, and there was a familial match. The once unidentified John Doe was Gerald John Forsman, finally giving a name to the bones found in the woods. After more than 20 years of not knowing if Gerald was dead or alive, his family at last had an answer. The man who had vanished in the early 2000s had indeed passed away, and his remains had been quietly resting in Tennessee for who knows how long before they were discovered. Now that Gerald Forsman has finally been identified, The case has shifted from a question of who he was to the deeper questions of how and why he died. As you'll recall, the Knox County Regional Forensic Center was unable to determine the exact cause and manner in which he perished. Reconstructing Gerald Forsman's final days will be one of the most delicate and challenging tasks for investigators. If investigators can find out who he was involved with in his last days, they may be able to start piecing together exactly what happened to him. Personally, evidence from the recovery scene suggests that Gerald Forsman may have been experiencing homelessness at the time of his death. When his remains were found in Knoxville, investigators noted that he was dressed in multiple layers of clothing. He was found wearing windbreaker pants, dark dress pants, Wrangler jeans, a navy hoodie, amongst other items on him, and in the vicinity. Such layering is often a sign of living without stable shelter, since homeless people frequently wear all of their clothing at once for both warmth and protection, as well as convenience. The presence of these mismatched layers, combined with the fact that Forsman's remains were found in a wooded area, seems to suggest he was sleeping rough in the forest. That said, this doesn't mean he necessarily died of exposure or something similar. Based on the latest data I was able to find, homeless people experience serious violence at a rate of around 20 times greater than the general population. That said, the forensic pathologist who initially reviewed the skeleton found no signs of violence. Bringing statistics in yet again, homeless people experience addictions at a much greater rate than the general population. That said, we don't know for certain if Gerald himself had any problems with substance usage, though of course circumstantially there's an elevated chance this is the case. Thus, if this was the case, Gerald's passing may have been the result of substance usage, though again there's no direct evidence to support this. At present, while Gerald Forsman may have his name back, the unsolved mystery of what happened to him continues on at present.